There's a story going on right now about a woman talking about how she was groped, sexually harassed while using a beta test of Facebook's newest VR platform, Horizon Worlds. And if you're about to scoff at someone being groped in VR where you can't actually touch someone, please stop typing and listen to the rest of this video first. I'm not kidding. Please give the video a go before you press send on your gut reaction to this. So your gut reaction is a bit ignorant, as it turns out, and I'll do my best to clear that up for you. But you can rest assured that at least you are not alone in that reaction and in that assumption that it's ridiculous to complain about being groped in VR. The fact that you are not alone in that reaction is why I'm making this video. Overwhelmingly most, in fact, reactions I've seen to this news story traveling around various news sites and social media and even meme sites has been people mocking the woman making the complaint, claiming she's overreacting, saying things like, "Woman with no problem creates fail problem," which from context, I assume they mean to say that this woman is creating false problems. But, literacy is hard for some people. Other people are claiming she's fragile and just doing this to get attention, or spinning it out into a strawman-style slippery slope argument about how a Karen is one day gonna sue you for bumping into her in VR. If you are sensing the typical woman-hating misogynistic undertone here of all women are liars, don't believe them, they're trying to trick you, they're overreacting to get attention, that, the kind of thing you hear basically every time a woman talks about harassment, well done. You're halfway to getting the point here. Now, let's roll back and build some context. For better or worse, Facebook, or as they've rebranded recently because Facebook is a woefully irrecoverably toxic brand that only morons react positively to hearing, now call themselves Meta, but it's Facebook. Facebook have been moving for a while now to slowly bring VR and their own concept of the metaverse into the hands of the normies. Not the geeks and the nerds and the tech heads and the bleeding edge people, but the normies. Your mum. Both with more consumer accessible hardware by buying Oculus, and of course alongside that hardware with their own proprietary software platforms. A metaverse, by the way, isn't their idea, no matter how they're trying to brand themselves these days. Zuckerberg is just trying to do what he always has done, seeing someone else's good idea, seeing it worked, and going, well, that's mine now, I'm just going to copy it, I'm going to co-opt it, I'm going to rebrand it, and I'm going to profit from it because I am a inhuman monster of a sociopath. But as a brief explanation to those of you who keep hearing the term metaverse lately and aren't really sure what it actually means, a metaverse is a concept similar to what we now call the web, the internet, except instead of experiencing things through individual websites and web pages of text and images and video and whatnot, it's a 3D virtual world. It's like what Second Life did in 2003. Or PlayStation Home tried to copy back in 2008, what apps like VRChat and Rec Room currently do in VR, but on an even broader execution with more mass appeal and more mass accessibility. A series of virtual worlds, experiences, games, performance spaces, work environments, social meeting points, all that kind of stuff, all linked and experienced through a common interface. On the web, we call it the web browser. In the metaverse, it will be a VR type experience. It is literally just the internet, but in a much more immersive and sort of natural interaction way. It's actually a really interesting idea, an amazing idea with massive potential, but an idea that will surely be utterly poisoned by the infection of corporate interests and greed. In any case, for those of you who have little experience with it directly so far, these kinds of experience already exist and have done for quite some time now. I've already mentioned the names of a few pioneers in the space, even the VR ones, which have been around for basically all of VR's current commercial existence. VRChat, for example, is one of the most popular social VR platforms around. It has been around since 2014 and started a more rapid rise to popularity around 2017 by virtue of it coming to the Steam storefront. And also, for those of you who have little experience with it so far, experiencing things in a VR environment is a lot different from how we use the web now. Just in every sense. For years now, I personally have been dipping in and out of virtual social spaces. In this context, they were kind of like Metaverse prototypes, companies experimenting, throwing stuff at the wall, see what sticks, finding out what works well and what doesn't, finding out which experiences need better filtering and which ones need more freedom. I've been popping in and out of VRChat since 2016. It's come a long way in sophistication and execution since then. It's been wonderful to watch it grow and evolve over time. And one hugely user-demanded update came a few years back in the form of a user-controlled privacy bubble. Get up out of my personal space. In operation, it's on by default these days, and it makes any untrusted avatar, people you don't know, people not on your friends list, for example, it means they literally disappear from view when they get too close to you. It's a weird choice for a social platform, right? Making it less social by making people disappear if they just happen to be standing too close. Well, this was demanded by users because the immersive nature of VR still triggers a sense of personal space invasion when others, unwelcomed, get too close to our own virtualized bodies. And just like in real life, some of us are much more sensitive to invasions of our personal space than others. So we're given control over that. It's on by default, but you can turn it completely off if you like. You can control how much space there is to give. You can control which type of user is allowed into your personal space, because there are different levels of trust assigned to users in VRChat, depending on how long they've been on the platform. Are they, confirmed? Are they on your friends list? And, their reputation as a user. Have they been reported before by violations? There's a whole sophisticated system in place to sort of try and fine tune this. And it's still evolving to this day, finding a way to make it work really transparently, really efficiently, and in a way that, users appreciate it working. So, even though no one can actually touch you or breathe on your neck or whatever, to some, having someone too close to you, even in VR, can feel just as uncomfortable as it does in a real physical meat space. And I know from personal experience in trying to explain this feeling of my personal space being invaded, some of you just have very little concept of it, and it's hard for you to conceptualize how it feels just to have someone just standing too close to you and how much of an anxiety trigger that can be. You can't imagine it yourself because you don't experience it. You have trouble imagining just how anxious that can make someone feel if you're not on the other side of it. You don't have the tools for the proper amount of empathy, and I get that. So please just try hard to empathize, sympathize, to understand that this is a real psychological, emotional reaction that happens that we have no control over, no deliberate control over. I can tolerate someone standing too close to me, like on a crowded train, but that doesn't mean I feel good about it. It means I can put up with it when I have to, but that doesn't mean I want it to happen or I'm happy for it to happen at any time. As an example of this kind of behavior and how it affects people in VR, even though you can't touch people and you can't feel them, after you've done watching this video, go find an older VRChat video. There are lots around. You won't have any trouble finding them. Pretty much any VRChat video that are recorded in public worlds from, say, 2 or 3 years ago. Look for the avatars in the background or whatever that keep backstepping away from other avatars that sort of step too close to them. They're trying to create personal space because they feel uncomfortable with having even an imaginary avatar too close to them. Look how often the avatar they're stepping back from steps forward again to try and close that distance, not realizing that they're making the other person uncomfortable. It's a misunderstanding, an error in communication, a lack of empathy for that. And the other person will step back over and over and over again. You might have seen this behavior in real life. I do it. I step back from people all the time and they take another step towards me for whatever reason. I step back again and they don't seem to get the hint that I don't want them that close to me. So I have to tell them flat out, and that feels rude when you have to do that. Please don't stand so close to me. It's like, stop. We can't have this conversation until you stop stepping too close to me because it's really wigging me out and I can't focus on what you're trying to say because you keep stepping too close to me. And again, I know some of you just can't understand that. You can't step into those shoes because you don't feel it. But believe me, it's a real thing and it feels awful, and it happens in VR just as effectively as it happens in real life for some people. In the earliest versions of VRChat, and this is why I told you to find an old video where they didn't have the privacy bubble system, this behavior was wildly common. It happened all the time. And a lot of the time it happened deliberately. Trolls would constantly harass people by just getting too close to them. They'd be all up in their face. They'd follow these users around in the environments. They get right up in their faces, be as disruptive as possible. They'd spout memes and stuff like that. And their victim would be begging them to stop, and running away was only an encouragement to them, because this is the childish mentality these people have. And this was the reaction they wanted. They wanted to wig these people out. They wanted them to run away. They wanted to chase them around because it was a game to them. They were trying to make someone else's experience shittier as a game. It's like that old, oh, you can't get mad, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you, can't get mad, you can't get mad, I'm not actually touching you. That cliche, that old sibling game that some of you might have played. You can't complain, I'm not actually touching you, I'm not poking you, I'm not touching you, I'm just waving my hands right in your face and making myself the absolute center of your attention. And if you don't understand how that feels on the other side, then, well, good for you. You've led a pretty cool life, I guess. Harassment, abuse, bullying, and the like are sadly common, both online and offline and everywhere we go. It's human nature, I suppose. Online, in a normal experience of the traditional social web, there's still a separation, an abstraction. We're talking through text or sometimes voice. It's an abstract, avatars and things like that. Even video chat, there's an abstraction there. And yet, it still can and will and does deeply affect people, the victims, in many, many very real ways that go on to their meat space lives, even through these various layers of abstraction. And it can still reinforce patterns of destructive and toxic behavior in the culprits. They're getting away with this. They find fun in it. They keep doing it over and over and over and over and again. And they get worse at it, and they keep ramping it up, and it makes them even worse people than they already were. So, of course, there's an ongoing effort to filter, control, limit, prevent this kind of online harassment, or cyberbullying, as we've come to call it. And anyone out there still trying to use the old, oh, don't take it so seriously, it's just the internet excuse, well, let me put it to you like this. Would you call up a police station and tell the desk sergeant or whoever answers the phone that you're going to go to their house and off their family while they sleep? And then, should you be caught, and you should be caught, you try and use as your excuse, don't be so sensitive. It was just the telephone. It's only the telephone. Why are you getting so mad? You could have just hung up the telephone. No, you wouldn't try to use that excuse. I don't care how facetious you want to be about this. Nobody would, because it's ridiculous to suggest it. It would be stupid. And no judge in the land would ever accept that excuse as genuine or even a good faith argument. They would know you're trying to blow smoke up their ass, and you'd probably get an even more severe sentence out of it just for trying that shit. The medium of communication, be it face-to-face, a phone call, the internet, or indeed a VR environment, doesn't magically erase the fact that abuse is abuse and threats are threats. And in general, shitty behavior is still shitty behavior in whatever form it takes. And there can and should be consequences expected in reaction to that shitty behavior, to that harassment, to that abuse. Be they legal consequences or just consequences of the rules of the establishment you are inside, virtual or real. And sure, having your ass grabbed by a stranger in a bar on a Friday night is indisputably different and easily argued worse experience than having someone grab at you in VR. It is indisputably different. But that also doesn't magically make it okay to harass someone in VR just because it's different, less intense from your point of view, perhaps. Not any more than hitting someone in the back of the head with a house brick magically makes it okay to fill someone's car up with dog shit. Utterly different acts. Inarguably, one is far more severe and dangerous than the other. Very different intents, very different outcomes. But one being a lot worse than the other doesn't make the other one excusable or okay. In VR, when you're immersed in a 3D environment, regardless of the relative level of realism, be it a cartoony world or an utterly convincing photorealistic world, doesn't matter. When you're piloting an avatar, again, doesn't matter if it's humanoid, whether it's a little cat, doesn't matter. inhabiting, controlling a virtualized body. When you're seeing it from your first-person perspective, the mind can and will still react subconsciously and otherwise to external stimulus, to perception, to actions in a very similar way than we do in real life, often identically than we do in real life. Have you ever flinched at one of those TikTok videos where, like, you know, a baseball suddenly whizzes right at the camera, even though it's a camera and not your face, and even though you're watching it on a tiny little screen, you still sort of instinctively flinch away from it? That's your body doing what comes naturally to try and keep you safe. That's a good, healthy reaction. And that's the kind of hardwired shit I'm talking about, but even more deeply wired, because it's connected not just to, you know, instinctive reactions of keeping our face safe from being caved in by a baseball bat, but it's tied into our emotions, our psychology. And these are, of course, issues that are still ongoing, still being worked on. Every social media site has rules against, and usually dictated punishments for, various kinds of abusive behavior. And yet it still happens constantly. Facebook's Oculus already bans the kind of behavior we've talked about in their VR platforms. It's in their behavior policy documentation, right down to a policy specifically against invading someone's personal space uninvited. They even have controls similar to those VRChat installed years ago, to do with the personal bubble filter thing, to help people control and filter who is permitted to be virtually, physically close to them and, you know, virtually interact with them in a physically simulated way. And in these documentations, they say flat out that repeated and flagrant abuses of these rules can and will result in just up to full-on account bans. They're not going to put up with it, at least on paper. These are not rules or controls that have been put into place on a whim. These are rules and controls that VR users have already discovered are necessary. Because psychologically, emotionally, our reactions to certain kinds of behavior from others, especially abusive behaviors, can, for many people, be not just unpleasant, but legitimately harmful for their ongoing mental health and sense of safety. And at the end of the day, their just pure willingness to keep using the VR platform in question, which is the main reason Facebook care, of course, because they don't care about people. But the more people they have using their stuff, the more money they can suck from those people, because money is what they care about, not people. And if people don't feel safe and welcome, fewer will use it, and fewer will use it as often, and therefore they have fewer wallets to drain. This is also the answer to, well, if you're being harassed, just move to a different virtual space, or just block them. There's an endless supply of arseholes, so blocking one at a time doesn't really solve the issue at hand. It's just a tool to help stop that specific incident from continuing. And allowing yourself to be chased away from a space you came into, well, that's hardly a victory over the abusers, is it? And it doesn't stop it happening again 30 seconds later in the next space you move into. So this woman from the start of the video, talking about being groped and sexually abused in a VR environment, isn't quite as hyperbolic or as silly at first blush might hint. And in the end, intent is more important than whether or not it counts in your mind as sexual harassment proper. When someone uses an avatar to make someone else using an avatar feel uncomfortable, feel threatened, feel unsafe, feel dehumanized, ironically enough, in a virtual environment where you don't have to present as a human at all. You know what I'm talking about, though. Or feel, indeed, violated. Whether or not that person can feel your hand on one of their body parts, it's the intent of that action that can matter. Besides that, physical touch is hardly the only kind of sexual harassment people face in any environment. So the inclusion of simulated physical touch inside of this particular story is not the only part of this particular story that you need to be paying attention to or that counts. Beyond that, with the ongoing development of various kinds of haptic feedback systems for use in VR, everything from touch gloves to full bodysuits, these are issues we're better off talking about now and finding solutions for now before it becomes an even more unpleasant thing, before it gets worse. We shouldn't wait until it gets much worse to start doing something about this, to start having these conversations. Besides that, in the very real immediate future, deeper avatar interaction is something one of the largest forces in this space is currently about to unleash. Like now, right now, this is a thing that's happening. VRChat are updating their avatar systems and mechanics so you can more realistically and physically interact with objects in the environments and indeed with other people's avatars, making your avatar physically react in a more realistic way to collisions between it and other things and other people's hands, for example, for a deeper and easier sense of immersion. So welcomed touch, invited touch can feel a bit more real, a bit more immersive than it used to. But along with that, of course, comes a deeper sense of immersion, a deeper psychological connection to your own avatar and what you do to someone else and what someone else does to you. Head pats and pats on the shoulder and things like that are, when invited, a pleasurable thing. When uninvited, if someone is chasing you around a virtual room, constantly scrubbing your head, that can be very unpleasant and very unwelcome. Same action, different intent. And this is even before we get to the realm of these extra accessories that you put on your hands or your body, whatever, to make you physically feel what happens in the virtual world. Again, we need to have these conversations now because this is happening now. So yeah, just because to you it might sound like a big nothing burger of imaginary problems from this woman from your point of view, perhaps try some empathy. Your experience is not the only one that counts. Speaking personally now, in VR, my personal, let's call them quirks, stemming from being on the autism spectrum, don't magically vanish when I put on that VR headset. My social awkwardness remains, certainly, though simulated eye contact is admittedly a bit easier when I'm not looking into real human fleshy eyes. But my sense of personal space is still very much active and still very much the same as it is in the real world. My heightened sensitivity to movement and loud noise is still very much present. Yes, even though I can control the volume of my headset, sudden, sharp, and repetitive noise, intrusive noise, still makes me quite anxious quite rapidly. And people having their hands or whatever shit right in front of my face waving about is still as deeply unpleasant as if someone was doing that to me in real life, even though I could just take off my VR headset anytime I like. Just because it's in VR, where I could take off that headset at any time to avoid that shit, still doesn't make it okay for someone to deliberately subject me to that shit, especially when they know it makes me feel shitty and makes my personal experience of this environment we're all trying to share worse. It's still shitty behavior, and so, very much, is groping someone in VR. And yes, even if they're in a sexy-looking avatar, the old, well, if they didn't want to be objectified, they shouldn't have dressed like that. They were clearly asking for it. That doesn't fly any more in VR than it does in the real world, you little creeps. So shush. To the creeps, if you're still with me, hopefully you've had the attention span, and to the non-creeps, thank you for your time and your attention span and making it to the end and hopefully having a good little think about this, especially for those of you who haven't been in VR, haven't experienced in VR, don't really have a personal experience for how the immersion can affect you psychologically, emotionally. It's not just an game in the way that a regular video game on a flat screen feels like. And even then, again, as we've been talking about, harassment happens there in multiplayer games and it's just as unwelcome there, but it's magnified by the sense of immersion and first-person perspective of VR. So empathy is the key word here, I think. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you, as always, to the patrons scrolling up above there who's above and beyond support. I very much appreciate. And if you're wondering about the hand movement, yeah, the magic motion leap thing, whatever the bloody hell it's called, plugged it into a different USB port. I'm getting a bit more reliability out of it. I think I was having a bit of a data bandwidth problem there, but